What my son's future father-in-law didn't know, standing there in my living room with that smug look on his face, was that his company's commercial lease, all 4 locations, 62,000 square feet of retail space, ran through a property management firm I'd built from nothing over 31 years. He thought he was talking to a retired handyman. He was wrong about that. My name is not important. What matters is this. I spent 4 decades working with my hands, then with my head, then with both at the same time, and somewhere along the way I stopped needing people to know what I was worth. My late wife Eleanor used to say that was my best quality and my worst habit at the same time. She'd been gone 6 years when all of this happened, and not a day went by that I didn't wish she'd been around to see how it ended. My son Marcus, I'll call him that even though that's not his name because some privacy still matters, had been dating a young woman named Felicity for about 2 years when he brought her home for the first time. She was sharp, funny, the kind of person who remembers the small things you mention once and brings them back later. I liked her immediately. I trusted that instinct. Her father was a different matter. His name was Clifford Beaumont. He owned a chain of upscale home furnishing stores across 4 states, the kind of places that sold throw pillows for $300 and called it curated living. He was 63, 2 years younger than me. And he wore his money the way some men wear cologne, too much of it applied before he even walked into the room. The first time I met Clifford was at a dinner he hosted at his house in Scottsdale. A real house. 8,000 square feet, a pool that looked like a resort, staff who moved quietly around the edges of conversations like they'd been trained to be invisible. I drove out in my old F-150. I'd had that truck since 2009, and I wasn't about to replace it just because someone else had a circular driveway. Felicity met me at the door, squeezed my arm, whispered, "Just be yourself." That worried me a little. Clifford shook my hand with the practiced firmness of a man who'd read a book about handshakes. "So you're the father," he said. "Not Marcus's dad. Not I've heard so much about you. Just the father. Like I was a category rather than a person." "I am," I said. "What is it you do?" He asked it the way people ask when they already think they know the answer and the answer is nothing interesting. I told him I was semi-retired, that I'd been in commercial real estate for most of my career. Property management, leasing, some development in the early years. I kept it brief. I always keep it brief with people like Clifford because the more you explain, the more they think you're trying to impress them, and I stopped trying to impress strangers sometime around 1997. He nodded the way people nod when they've already stopped listening. "Felicity mentioned you were in construction." "Property management," I said again, gently. Right. He smiled and turned to greet someone else. That was the first night. I told myself it was nerves or distraction or just the general self-absorption that comes with hosting a large dinner. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because my son loved his daughter and that counted for something. The second time we met at a birthday party for Felicity's mother at a restaurant in downtown Phoenix, Clifford was worse. He spent 40 minutes talking about his expansion plans, a 5th location he was opening in Tempe, and then turned to me with what I can only describe as charitable curiosity and asked if I'd ever thought about doing something more ambitious with my retirement years. "I keep busy," I said. "You should look into real estate investment," he said. "Completely serious, not management. Actual investment. Lease development partnerships, that's where the real money is." I looked at him for a moment. "I keep that in mind." My son caught my eye across the table and gave me a small, apologetic shrug. Felicity was talking to her mother and hadn't heard. I let it go. But the third time I was done letting things go. It was a Sunday afternoon in March, about 3 months after the engagement. Marcus and Felicity had announced it quietly, just family. A simple dinner at my house where Marcus got down on one knee in the kitchen because Felicity had said once she didn't want a public proposal. I made my chili that night. Eleanor's recipe, really. I just follow her instructions. Felicity cried a little and then laughed at herself for crying, and Marcus looked the way a man looks when everything is exactly right. Clifford called me the following week to discuss arrangements. That was how he phrased it. Not to congratulate me, not to talk about our kids, but to discuss arrangements. I should have known then. He came to my house on a Sunday. I offered him coffee. He accepted it without thanking me and sat down at my kitchen table like he was sitting in a waiting room. One ankle crossed over his knee, looking around at my house with an expression I recognized from years of business. The expression of a man calculating value. My house is not small. It is not flashy. It's a 4-bedroom ranch on 2 acres in Chandler that I bought in 1989 and renovated 3 times over the decades. It has good bones that it's paid for, and it's full of things that mean something to me, including Eleanor's garden out back that I've kept alive through 6 Arizona summers without her. Clifford looked at it like he was estimating what it would cost to tear down and rebuild. I want to talk about the wedding, he said. Of course. Felicity has certain expectations. He paused. We've raised her a certain way. I waited. The kind of wedding she deserves. The venue, the guest list, the reception. We're looking at something in the range of $180,000. I didn't blink. That's a significant amount. It is. Which is why I think it's only fair that both families contribute. He looked at me directly for the first time since he sat down. I'm prepared to cover 60%. But I'd expect your family to handle the rest. I did the math quietly. He was asking me for $72,000. Marcus and Felicity haven't mentioned a budget to me, I said carefully. Have you talked to them about this? I'm talking to you, he said. Man to man, father to father. He leaned back. I think we both know that a wedding at this level is an investment in their future. And frankly, it sets the tone for how the families are perceived. I'd hate for the disparity to be obvious. There it was. I set my coffee cup down. I looked at the window over the sink where Eleanor's herbs used to grow in little clay pots before I had to move them to the back porch. I thought about what she would have said at this moment. Probably something short and definitive that would have ended the conversation immediately. She had a gift for that. Clifford, I said, think about it. He nodded, satisfied, like that was close enough to yes. We talked for another 10 minutes about nothing in particular, and then he left. I watched his car pull out of my driveway. A black Escalade, current year, not a mark on it. And I stood at the kitchen window for a long time after it disappeared. I called my son that evening. Did you know about this? I asked. There was a pause that told me everything. He mentioned wanting to talk to you. Felicity and I told him we didn't need anything that big. We want something small. We told him. How small? 20, maybe 25,000, between both families comfortably. He told me 180, I said, and that he expected me to cover 72. The silence on the other end of the line was very loud. Dad, don't apologize. I just needed to know if you knew. I paused. Is Felicity happy with what you two have planned? She's embarrassed her dad called you. She doesn't want a big wedding. We've been over this with him 3 times. All right, I said. You let me handle this. Dad, please don't. I'm not going to do anything dramatic, I said. And I meant it at the time. Here is what Clifford Beaumont did not know about me, and what I had never felt the need to tell him. In 1993, 2 years after Eleanor and I moved to Arizona, I formed a small commercial property management LLC with a partner named Ted, a good man who retired to New Mexico in 2011. Over the following decade, we built it slowly, the way you build anything worth keeping, carefully, without shortcuts, by doing what we said we were going to do. By 2005, we managed 37 commercial properties across the Phoenix metro area. By 2015, after I bought Ted out and brought in 2 junior partners, that number was just over 90. The company's name is Whitmore & Associates Property Management. My last name, which I'd stopped using in casual conversation because it made things complicated at dinner parties, is Whitmore. I am Earl Whitmore. No, wait, that name's on the list. I am George Whitmore, the same Whitmore whose name appears on the leasing agreements for Beaumont Home Furnishings' flagship store in Scottsdale, that Tempe location currently under lease negotiation, and their Mesa store, which had been in our portfolio since 2007. I found this out about 6 weeks after Clifford's visit to my kitchen, when my office manager Diane pulled up his company file during a routine portfolio and mentioned, almost in passing, that Beaumont Home Furnishings was 3 months behind on their Scottsdale property service fees, a separate line item from rent covering maintenance and shared facilities, and that their Tempe expansion lease was still unsigned pending final negotiation. I sat with that information for 2 full days before I decided what to do with it. I want to be clear about something. I did not want to hurt Felicity. I did not want to blow up my son's engagement or make an enemy of the woman he loved. Everything I did from that point forward was calibrated around one goal, making Clifford understand who he was actually dealing with, so that he would stop underestimating my family and stop trying to leverage a wedding to establish some kind of hierarchy that existed only in his own head. I called a meeting. I had Diane send a formal notice to Beaumont Home Furnishings requesting a lease review meeting for all three properties, citing the outstanding service fees and the pending Tempe negotiation. Standard business language, nothing alarming. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning at our offices in Chandler. Clifford sent his operations manager, a tired-looking man named Phil, who arrived with a folder of documents and an attitude that suggested he expected a routine administrative conversation. I walked in 7 minutes late, intentionally, because I wanted him already seated, wearing a jacket and tie, which I rarely do, and I sat down across from Phil and introduced myself as the principal of Whitmore and Associates. Phil looked at me, then he looked at his folder, then he looked at me again. "George Whitmore," he said. "That's right. Are you related to Marcus Whitmore?" "He's my son," I said pleasantly. Phil closed his folder. He had the expression of a man who had just realized he was in a very different meeting than the one he prepared for. I let him sit with that for a moment. Then I said, "I'd like to discuss your outstanding service fees, and I have some questions about the Tempe lease before we move forward with final terms." We talked for an hour. I was professional, direct, and completely fair. The service fees were resolved. I didn't penalize them. I simply required a payment schedule and a deposit going forward, which was standard. The Tempe lease negotiation, I suggested we pause while we reviewed the overall relationship. Another standard phrase. It means nothing and everything simultaneously. Phil left looking like he needed a long lunch and a phone call with his boss. That phone call, I'm told, happened within 20 minutes. Clifford called me directly at 4 o'clock that same afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 4:45. I let that one go too. When he called a third time at 6:15, I picked up. "George." His voice was different, still controlled, but compressed somehow, like a man who had rehearsed something and then abandoned the script. "Clifford," I said. "I think we need to talk." "I agree." I didn't realize." He stopped. Started again. "Phil tells me you're the principal at the management company that holds our leases." "3 of your 4 locations, yes." Another silence. I would have appreciated knowing that. "I suppose," I said, "though I wonder what difference it would have made to the conversation we had at my kitchen table." He didn't answer that. "Clifford, I'm not calling your leases. Your stores are good tenants and I have no interest in disrupting your business. What I am interested in is a clear understanding going forward." I paused. "My son is marrying your daughter. They want a small wedding. They've told you that. I'd like you to respect what they want. The service fees will be handled exactly as Phil and Diane discussed. This isn't leverage. I'm not threatening you. I meant that. But I do think it's important that you understand who you sat across from in that kitchen. Because I don't think you did." The silence that followed was long enough that I wondered if he'd set the phone down. "No," he finally said, quietly, "I didn't. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio," I told him. Not because he'd asked, but because I wanted him to have the complete picture. My father worked in the steel mill until it closed. I came to Arizona in 1991 with my wife and $11,000 and a business plan I'd written on yellow legal pads. I never hid what I built. I just didn't advertise it to people who hadn't earned the right to know. Another long pause. "I owe you an apology," he said. It came out stiff, like a word he didn't use often enough to be comfortable with. "You owe Marcus and Felicity one," I said, "and you owe them a conversation about what kind of wedding they actually want." There was a follow-up conversation. Clifford with Felicity, then with Marcus, then all 4 of us at dinner at a restaurant that was my suggestion. Deliberately middle of the road, neither fancy nor sparse. Clifford was quieter than I'd ever seen him. He asked Marcus questions that were actual questions, not assessments. He told Felicity he'd support whatever wedding she wanted. She wanted 40 guests at a vineyard outside Sedona, dinner under string lights, her grandmother's ring, and a bluegrass band her college roommate's brother played in. It cost $26,000 total. Both families split it evenly. It was a beautiful evening. I danced once to a slow song I didn't know the name of, and I thought about Eleanor for most of it. The way you do when something good is happening and the person you most want to tell isn't there. At the end of the night, Clifford found me standing by the fence at the edge of the vineyard property, looking out at the hills going dark in the distance. He stood next to me for a while without saying anything. Then, "She looks happy." "She does," I said. "Your son too." "He does." We stood there a while longer. The band was playing something soft and the lights were warm behind us, and the air smelled like juniper and the particular sweetness of a late September evening in Arizona. I misjudged you, Clifford said. You misjudged what a person looks like, I said. It's a common mistake. He nodded slowly. I don't know if he fully understood the difference between those two things. Maybe he will someday. I drove home in my 2009 F-150, windows down, the long stretch of desert highway quiet at that hour. I'd stopped trying to make people see me correctly a long time ago. What I'd learned over 63 years and one very good marriage and 31 years of building something from nothing is that you don't owe anyone a performance of your own value. You just have to know it yourself. Clear and quiet the way you know your own name. The way Eleanor always said I carried it. Not in front of me like a shield, but behind me like a foundation. That's enough. That has always been enough. I've been thinking about that fence at the edge of the vineyard. The one I was standing at when Clifford came and found me at the end of the night. The hills were going dark. The lights were warm behind us, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. That silence felt different from every other silence between us. The earlier ones had been full of his assumptions. That one was empty of them. What happened between the kitchen table and that vineyard didn't come from luck. It came from something I've tried to live by for 63 years, even when I didn't have the words for it yet. There's a kind of order to things that has nothing to do with status or money or whose name is on the invitation list. It has to do with what you actually do over time when nobody's watching. Clifford built a business on appearances. I built mine on keeping my word. And when those two approaches finally collided, the outcome wasn't really a surprise. Not to me anyway. I don't think Clifford is a bad man. I think he made the mistake that comfort makes in a lot of people. He stopped asking himself hard questions. He looked at my truck and my house and my quiet manner and he calculated a number. That number was wrong. Not because I was hiding anything. I never hid anything in my life. But because he'd never thought to look past the surface. That's a failure of the mind, and it's a correctable one. But only if you're willing to do the correcting. The thing that kept me steady through all of it, through his kitchen table arithmetic, through his operations manager's starter face, through that phone call where his voice came out compressed and strange, was something Eleanor used to call knowing your own ground. She meant it literally, at first. About the garden. About how you can't grow anything worth keeping if you don't understand the soil. But she meant it about everything else too. You have to know what you built and why you built it. Not to wave it at people. Just to stand on it without flinching when someone tries to make you feel small. That's what I want Marcus to carry forward. More than anything I could put in a wedding envelope. Not the company, not the properties, not the name. The understanding that integrity is not a personality trait, it's a practice. You do the honest thing when the dishonest thing would be easier. You do it again the next day. You do it for 30 years. And then one Thursday morning, a man named Phil walks into a conference room and suddenly the whole ledger becomes visible. I never set out to teach Clifford a lesson. I set out to protect my son's dignity and, honestly, my own. But what Clifford lost, and what I hope he found again, slowly, at that vineyard, was the understanding that the world doesn't actually organize itself around the people who perform well, the loudest. It organizes around the people who built something real and kept it real and never needed anyone to validate it for them. My father worked in the steel mill until there was no steel mill left. He never complained about it. He used to say that a man's back tells the truth about his life in a way his mouth never quite can. I think about that more now than I did when I was young. I think what he meant was that endurance is its own kind of argument. You don't win by being loudest. You win by still being there when the noise stops. Marcus and Felicity danced until nearly midnight. I watched from a chair near the edge of the tent, drinking water, listening to that bluegrass band play something I still don't know the name of. It was enough. It was more than enough.